Hello, Rebel, and welcome back to my life. So, this December will mark 10 years of me being a published indie author. My first work came out in December of 2012, and here we are. So, recently I've been spending a lot of time looking back at my work over the last decade and what I've done, and when things have gone well, and when things have not gone so well, so that I can hopefully make future things go weller. Better. Have I mentioned I write books? But for those of you who don't know, I pretty obsessively track a bunch of numbers related to what I do. How many hours I work, how many words I write in those hours, how much money I make, all of it on just a whole plethora of graphs that stretches back for the last 10 years. And because I obsessively track these numbers, I'm able to see these long periods of dips in production where I was hardly getting anything done, followed by or in between these frenzied pieces or frenzied times of like tremendous writing, a huge output. I've said this before on the channel many times, but if I had remained productive as I was in 2013 all the way up until now, I'd have published well over 10 million words by now. It's ridiculous. But recently, I think that I've discovered something, which is that in analyzing times where I've been very productive versus times that I've been no productive, I seem to lose a lot of steam anytime that I dive too hard into analyzing art in general, and my work in particular. Every year I set myself the goal of reading more. You probably do the same thing. This year, I'm actually doing it. I've been reading a lot. It's delightful. New t-shirt idea. Have I mentioned I like books? By the way, total side tangent, but the most recent book that I read is The Song of Achilles. It's very good. It's wonderful, and you really need to read it. Spoiler, it's about Achilles and Patroclus. So, it's not a happy ending. Let's put it that way. This is like watching the Titanic. You don't wonder what's going to happen to the boat, but it's just it's very delightful. In that very Greek tragedy sort of way, but it really captures the very foundational essence of Greek tragedy in general. Anyway, The Song of Achilles. You don't need to hear me talk about it. Just go read it. But yeah, in addition to reading a lot more, I'm also watching a lot more movies and shows. Most of them with my family, but sometimes by myself. And I'm just choosing what I want to watch. What looks fun, what stories I've enjoyed in the past, if they're getting sequels, or what new story looks good. I'm just like, that looks amazing, and then I watch it. Or that book looks great, and then I read it. I haven't, since I was a kid, just walked into bookstores and looked at a book on the shelf and been like, oh yeah, okay, that looks pretty good. Picked it up, and then just read it. And now I'm doing that like once a week or once every couple of weeks. During my day job, when I'm working, I've also been spending a lot of time listening to actual play D&D, like mostly just like kind of re-listening to Critical Role, instead of listening to the stuff that I was doing before, which would be like art breakdowns or analysis or critiques or reviews, or just sort of like more craft-oriented stuff. In other words, I'm focusing a lot more on consuming lots of fun stories that make me happy or like tickle my storytelling buttons. EXU Calamity did not make me happy per se, but as a result, I'm finding it a lot easier to get my butt in the chair each day and just write. Or, currently I'm finishing up the audiobooks project, but I'm finding it easier to just do that. June, which just wrapped up, it's July 1st as I'm recording this, June was pretty crappy in terms of my production, compared to May especially. But still, it was more productive than most of my months in 2021, which is something that I only know because, as I said, I track all of my numbers very obsessively. Because it really does feel to me, and possibly to you, like the less time I spend on story analysis, the easier I find it to just tell a story. Story time. One of the worst experiments I've ever done in my entire professional writing career was trying to use the story grid for book outlining, which I did back in like 2016, 2017. The Story Grid is a book by Sean Coyne, which outlines his method for editing books. He's a professional editor. He's very, very good. He knows storytelling. He knows craft very exceptionally well. It's a fantastic book. It's a good resource. You should read it for sure. You should use it for what it's intended for. Like I said, Sean Coyne is an editor. He wrote the book primarily for editors. He also intended for authors to read it so that they could, maybe understand editing a bit more, but like to facilitate a conversation between the author and the editor, not to turn the author into the editor of their own work. Because as we've talked about endlessly, And as you should be well aware by now, you need an editor. You need that outside perspective no matter what. That's always going to make it better. And somebody from the outside can have all the storytelling craft and they can analyze it to your book because they are removed from it in a way that you cannot be because you wrote it. So when I took Sean Coyne's editing method, his editing template that he would apply to books after they were already done, and I tried applying it to my book outlines before I even started writing them, disaster. Terrible. Awful. My writing almost completely stalled for 2 years. And then I stopped doing that and I just said, you know what, I'm just going to write my next books. And then in 1 year, I published 3 books. Because if you contrast that time where I was overanalyzing my work to the times in the past where I've been the most productive, in terms of my own consumption, I was just reading a lot and watching a lot of movies, and it made it easier for me to just write a lot. It was story in, story out. I've toyed with the idea before of like going and getting professional education, you know, some college or something like that, some post-high school education in storytelling. And the more that I think about it, the more that I think that that would be the biggest disaster in the world to me, that it would absolutely nuke my writing career out of existence because I would get so analytical about everything that I would be afraid to sit down and just write some words today. Don't get me wrong. Critical analysis is great. It can help educate you. It can help you make better art in the future, as long as it's there and in your knowledge base and something that you can just think with. But while you're diving into the weeds of learning how to analyze or learning how to break down story structure, it's really easy to get into analysis paralysis. There's an old saying that those who can't do, teach. That is a bullshit statement. There are tons of amazing teachers who are also productive professionals in their field. And your mileage may vary, but I've seen way too many people who do get into academia or do get into teaching specifically because they are so analytical and so dug into the mechanics of how everything works and whether it's good or not and what good art even is, that they're not able to produce anything. They've gotten so into the weeds on every single significance of every single component of the story that they can't just tell a story because everything has to be thought through a million times. You can spend forever trying to make your art perfect and learn more and more ways to get it closer to perfect. But it will never be perfect. It will never, ever, ever be perfect. Ever. You will never think your art is perfect. And if you don't finish it, it will never even be good. We've all got a perfect vision in our minds of how amazing and great and perfect our art is supposed to be in its purest form. You've got that vision of how it's going to read, or how it's going to look, or how it's going to sound. And it's perfect. And you've got to teach yourself to take your work and push it as close as you can to that ideal of perfection. But once a reasonable length of time has passed, you gotta be done and you gotta move on to the next thing. Remember that Ira Glass quote about the gap? You probably started creating, you probably became an artist, a writer, a musician, whatever, because you consumed so much art. You listened, you read, you watched, and it made you feel inspired. It made you want to do things because you were a fan. The creative works of others, of what was fun and what made you happy, that's what motivated you to create in the first place, to write, to draw, to do whatever it is that you do. Let it motivate you again. It's still there. It can still make you feel that way. Instead of sitting there endlessly massaging your work until it's just getting uncomfortable for you, both click publish, then go consume a bunch of new favorite shit. Go find some more books in your genre and just read them. Don't think about it. Just read them. Find another one. You read a bad book? Okay, the next book will probably be better. Maybe it won't, but then the next book will be. Watch or read or listen to something great, or not so great, but something that makes you go, wow, I like this. I like this stuff, and I want to do stuff like this. And then go do it. I can't wait to see it when you're done. That is all I've got for you today, Rebel. As always, if you want to help me keep making these videos, I have a Patreon. The link is in the description. You know how Patreon works. Go do the thing. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you next Friday. Bye!